Hi, my name is Spencer Sunshine, and this video is going to be a book review I wrote as a Patreon post that a lot of people are very interested in. And so I will put links to the original below, and I hope that you enjoy this, or at least find it as interesting as I did. So a couple years ago, I was reviewing Peter Staudenmaier's book, Ecology Contested: Environmental Politics Between Left and Right, when I came across a brief passage about Hardline. I shuddered as long repressed memories came flooding back. Hardline was a kind of micro subculture which was part of the 1990s DIY hardcore scene. It was militantly and sometimes violently straight edge, vegan, animal liberationist, and radical environmentalist, but also anti abortion and homophobic. I ran across it while going to shows in Dayton, Ohio around 1993 and 1994, often at the New Space, and it was very, very weird stuff. So when the algorithm churned up a book called Total Revolution, question mark, An Outsider History of Hardline by Phoenix X Eeyore, I knew I had to get it, and it did not disappoint. Now, grad school had massacred my joy of reading, and it's been a long time since I've picked up a book I couldn't put down, and this was the one. So what follows is not a book review. There's some problems with the book structure, and there are pieces that I'm not going to touch on that maybe I disagreed with, or this or that. But what this is going to be is highlights from the book that really stuck out to me, and describe some of Hardline's many bizarre twists and turns. Now, be warned that Total Revolution may be a little difficult to follow if you're not very familiar with the 1990s hardcore scene, but if you are, it is eye-opening, and I highly recommend it. It's available at the very reasonable DIY price for $12, and if that's too much for you, there's a PDF floating around you can pluck off of your favorite pirate website. So the hardcore kids, or the hardline kids that we came across, or rather avoided, were based in Eaton, Ohio. And at the end of this, I'll read a description of this scene by one of the people in the book. Now, rumor had it that they would roll old people stumbling out of bars, and we assumed that Hardline was a subset of the straight edge movement. Straight edge, in turn, was popularized by the 1981 Minor Threat song called Straight Edge, clocks in at only 46 seconds, and then this helped spur a current sort of within the hardcore scene. Straight edgers rejected drugs, alcohol, and promiscuous sex. And as the years went on, even caffeine became trafe, and then new things like veganism were adopted by the scene. Straight edge is certainly not my thing, but especially in the punk rock world where drug abuse and addiction were rife, it was a perfectly understandable position to take, and I respected it as a concept. Some straight edgers were lovely people. They were tolerant, feminist, vegan, anarchist, environmentalist, and the like. Others, however, were macho, violent, conservative assholes. Hardline was a bizarre mixture of the two. Hardline's logo were crossed assault rifles, and I was never quite sure what that had to do with being sober. This, however, is a cover of the book. It's a parody of their logo, so just so you know, this is on the cover. Hardline followers openly threatened violence towards those who disagreed with their amazingly arrogant, simplistic, and sometimes downright absurd politics. The ones we ran into were uniformly young, white, macho men, or teenage boys. The vibe of suburban Protestantism was so strong, I couldn't tell if Hardline was countercultural at all. They had terrible fashion and they listened to shitty metallic hardcore music. Their band, Vegan Reich, was rife with Nazi references. Without their fanatical fan base, I don't see how the advocacy of a vegan dictatorship could be seen as anything but parody. And indeed, Eeyore in the book suggests the band may have even started out as a parody band. There was a trend of them like Crucial Youth going on at that time. They have a wonderful song called Positive Dental Outlook you should listen to on YouTube or Spotify or whatever. To call Hardline holier than thou was to be charitable. I'm going to read Vegan Reich's lyrics to their song The Way It Is. Fuck you. Shut your fucking mouth. We didn't ask for your opinion. We're telling you the way it is, so sit back and listen. Your position is irrelevant to the situation. It's black and white. You're wrong, we're right, and you better come to that realization. So expect no fucking mercy. If you're guilty, you will pay. No chances to discuss it. You're gonna fucking hang. I mean, I don't, you're gonna murder people who aren't straight edge? I mean, so at least as much as they talked about it, Hardline's political focus seemed to be on animal liberation, sobriety, homophobia, and anti-abortion. Eeyore documents numerous animal liberation front arrests of hardliners, especially between 1992 and 1997. And they also had rhetorical support for the Earth Liberation Front, although this in the US only started picking up around 98 when Hardline was in decline. They believed that homosexuality was supposedly against natural law, which, if you ever hear people talk about natural law, go running. And this was the concept that helped justify a lot of their beliefs. Other supposed perversions that they opposed were porn and sex outside of committed relationships. Hardliners formed a group called Vegans for Life that protested outside of abortion clinics. They praised the assassination of abortion doctor John Brinton. And after the bombing of another abortion clinic, one hardliner wrote, "One clinic down, many more to go." On paper, at least, Hardline was opposed to capitalism. They didn't talk about this very much. And a neo-Nazi version of it actually developed in Europe. This caused the insiders to declare that make it clear they were anti-fascist and they denounced racism and nationalism. But again, this wasn't a big emphasis that they talked about. But Hardline was denounced in turn for its views on abortion and LGBTQ plus people by the larger hardcore scene. It was turning left at that time, and in particular, the influence of feminism and queer liberation was growing inside of it. And so, for example, Maximum Rock and Roll, which was the biggest punk magazine, banned Hardline ads. Now, although this answer may seem simple at first glance, whether Hardline constituted a red-brown movement simply on the basis of homophobia and anti-abortion is a question that's like really too complicated for this essay. In a previous Patreon post, I wrote about some of the complications and the different kinds of things that we are referring to when we talk about red-brown movements. Eeyore spends quite a bit of time in the book probing this question. He juxtaposes this movement's Hardline's views with those of Move, the Philadelphia, this sort of black cult around John Africa. They were bombed in the 1980s by the government, and it like killed many of the members and burned down a whole city block. Now, he brings this up in particular because a Move became very popular amongst the left. In the late 90s, one of their sympathizers, the journalist Mumia Abu-Jamal, was on death row, and there was a movement ultimately successful to stop this. And so, but Move had also very, very similar politics. They were also anti-abortion and homophobic. And Eeyore asks, why was Move embraced and why was Hardline rejected? And I think it's an interesting question. And I also want to add if Hardline's positions on abortion and homophobia by themselves constituted red-brown politics, especially in the pre-war era, there is going to be very few people on the left that would not be considered red-brown as well. These were not common politics at all, really until the 1960s, I think. There were exceptions, of course. Now, one of the things I did learn from the book was that Hardline wasn't just a sort of floating subcultural movement. It had a singular founder and ideologue, an insufferable guy named Sean Mutaki, I believe. I'm sorry if I'm massacring Sean's name, and who founded the band Vegan Reich. I was shocked to find out that he actually came out of the 1980s punk scene, the political anarcho-punk scene, best known for the band Crass, although he was closest to the people in the Apostles. Now, anarcho-punk couldn't be further from hardline in almost all ways. Anarcho-punks were known for being dirty, drunk punks who wore studded leather jackets. I, at the time, to some extent maybe today, are still following kind of in this tradition. Mutaki also attended two of the most important North American anarchist gatherings of the 1980s, the 1986 one in Chicago and the 1988 one in Toronto. And at this time, he identified as a class war anarchist. And these gatherings helped set up the modern anarchist milieu in America that sort of came into its own in the 1990s. But at both of these, one of the important things, I guess, for him was that at both of these gatherings, he clashed with the other attendees over the sidelining of veganism and animal rights. So he forms the band Vegan Reich in 1989, and in 1991 is a gathering in Minneapolis, which is key to congealing the hardline movement, and that would have been right before I ran into it. And despite Mutaki being based in Southern California, the movement flourished in the Midwest, and there were chapters in Memphis, Indianapolis, Dayton, and Cincinnati. The violence that was connected with it is less unusual than it might be now. There was really a huge amount of violence in the punk scene. There were a number of murders going on, and not just by Nazi skinhead gangs. In LA, I just read an article about the LA punk gangs, and it talked about several murders there. The violence was really quite incredible. The 80s punk scene, which I was a kid at the very end of, was this very underground thing that was very not controlled. And so, for example, in Salt Lake City, a militant straight edgers murdered a teenager in 1998. There were also crews or gangs, some of them morphed into gangs loosely associated with Hardline, including FSU, who still exists, I believe. They're called Fuck Shit Up or Friends Stand United. And in Eaton, the gang Courage Crew. These are the people we ran into, and in the book it specifies some of them were hard. There wasn't a Hardline gang itself, but some of the members were. Now, Eeyore dismisses or downplays incidents of actual violence committed by hardliners, saying these were committed mostly by the non-hardline vegan straight edgers. And I do appreciate it's a fine distinction, I'm sure, to many. I really do appreciate that he is making this. I assume Eeyore is a he. Apologies if that's not the case. But while I don't have evidence to the contrary, I personally find it hard to believe that hardliners weren't involved in violence. There were a number of other surprising things I found out in Total Revolution. First, as noted, was that the movement did not come out of straight edge, although as it developed, it became perceived or interpreted as the most extreme version of it. And I would guess that most people who joined it came from the more traditional straight edge scene. But in fact, Eeyore says that Vegan Reich weren't even straight edge when the band was first founded, although they did become so by the time of their first record. Also, as I just mentioned, Hardline wasn't just a loose subcultural trend. That was a kind of self-identity, although I'm sure a number of people picked it up this way, but it had formal chapters. Now, whether this claim is true or not, in 1996, they said they had 16 chapters in 4 countries, although a chapter might be only 1 or 2 people. Now, the movement had a downturn, and Mutaki left in 1993 to play reggae, of all things. It roared back in 1998. He came back and formed the Hardline Central Committee and claimed that the next year there were 19 chapters in 7 countries. Now, while that revival didn't last long, during it, Mutaki started promoting guerrilla warfare, claiming that, quote, 1 block at a time, Hardline cells would shoot, bomb, and burn all manifestations of society's wickedness. Now, I'm not sure how burning society's wickedness is supposed to work. I guess maybe through the aforementioned vegan dictatorship, but okay. Third, actually underlying a lot of Hardline's beliefs was a syncretic spiritual system that included Rastafarianism, Eastern Orthodox Christianity, Buddhism, Islam, and even Taoism. In 98, Mutaki said, quote, Hardline is the primordial way. It is the striving for the divine wherever that presence can be found. And this religiosity really surprised me. But thinking back, and it's mentioned in the book, this probably shouldn't have people who came out of the hardcore scene. Some people came out of Youth of Today and founded the band Shelter, had gone into ISKCON, known as Hare Krishna. And so there was already this tradition of this scene developing in this direction. But Mutaki rejected Krishna because he saw it as apolitical. The fourth thing that surprised me was about race. As I said, the hardcore scene of its time in general was really quite super majority white and just a little less male, and it was changing at that time. And even amongst this, Hardline stood out for being almost without exception white men. But the real irony here is Mutaki was a person of color, as was the majority of the band Vegan Reich, and he gave the racial demographics of the movement as one of the reasons that he initially left it. Soon after Mutaki's attempt to revive the movement in 98, he formed 2 religious groups in quick succession, 2 Muslim groups, Allah, the people of God, and then the more political group, Talia al-Mahdi, Vanguard of the Messiah. Mutaki had converted to Islam a few years before in 1995. Now, the second group, the Vanguard of the Messiah, I'll not, torture you with my non-existent Arabic. Seems like it was an Islamist group. They claimed to have 7 chapters in 7 countries, and unsurprisingly, they also had very toxic politics. In 2003, the space shuttle Columbia exploded, and one of the astronauts was Israeli. And so Mutaki praised this and like certainly talk about how you're going to strike a blow against the Zionist entity as a Israeli astronaut dying. Now, this caught the attention of the Southern Poverty Law Center. They wrote an article about white supremacists who also were praising or celebrating the fact the space shuttle blew up with this Israeli citizen, and they included a mention of Mutaki's group in it, just like a line or two. Now, there are never very many hardliners, maybe 200, maybe a little more, and people pass through these movements pretty quickly. Um, and surely this one, perhaps more than others, because it had very rigorous demands very few people could keep up with. Not just did you have to be straight edge and all these other things, you weren't allowed to eat processed rice and sugar, or processed rice and flour, sugar, or artificial flavors or preservatives. And Mutaki said openly he saw Hardline as a monastic revolutionary movement of sorts. Now, but everyone can't be a monk, and this included Raid, who were the only other Hardline band of note that hung around for a little bit. And their members actually left the movement after they broke up in 1992, their main guy abandoning straight edge altogether. Now, for such a small movement, a surprising number of people went on to be known for other things, with music and activism being the obvious ones. Some of the musicians, some of the people in music who came out of Hardline, some of the Vegan Reich members actually went into Fall Out Boy and into Ariel Pink's Haunted Graffiti. Some of the people who became well-known activists included the David Agranoff of the Earth Liberation Front and the Animal Liberation Front. I'll make a note about him later. And Walter Bond, who was a activist and used the Animal Liberation Front logo, and J.P. Goodwin, who co-founded a still existing group called CAFT, the Coalition Against the Fur Trade. And then some others went into television, which really surprised me. Ryan Downey became an MTV reporter, and Elgin James wrote a TV series called Mayans MC, which was a spinoff of Sons of Anarchy. Hardline also influenced Animal Liberation Front activist Peter Young, as well as the much more prominent hardcore band Earth Crisis. Although Eeyore carefully notes that Earth Crisis were only Hardline sympathizers rather than adherents, they rejected homophobia, and in extreme circumstances such as rape, accepted abortion, implying, and I wasn't clear or sure about this, that hardliners did not. The book ends with Walter Bond, a notoriously unhinged straight-edge anarchist who sported his very heavy facial tattooing, and he went to prison several times, first for burning a meth lab and then for Animal Liberation Front actions. In prison, he converted to and then left Islam. He embraced and denounced anarchism, and he finally adopted a quasi-Nazi stance with a project called the Vegan Final Solution. And some of the people who were supporting him, who kind of cooled and warmed to him at this point, this was too much, and they denounced him. Now, while Bond's story neatly bookends the trajectory of Hardline in Total Revolution, the book was published first in 2001 and the second edition in 2022. And then since then, Bond has actually gone much further, fully embracing neo-Nazism. In fact, while he was in prison, he met Brandon Russell, who was the founder and first leader of the hugely influential neo-Nazi terrorist group Atomwaffen Division, whose members and associates have murdered 5 people, and they helped spur this entire new wave of real and aspiring, this global network of neo-Nazi terrorism. Now, when Russell was released from prison, a lot of us noticed he took a picture of himself wearing an Animal Liberation Front t-shirt, and it turns out that it was Bond himself who converted him to these politics. So Eeyore has a critical but much more sympathetic view of Hardline than I do, and I think this is totally the right thing for the first major chronicler of a movement to have that position. But from my perspective, Bond's evolution was simply the logical conclusion of all of the problems that existed in Hardline from the very beginning. Now, as I said, I want to read a piece about the Eaton scene. It's by David Agranoff. And after I published this, a number of people from the animal liberation scene read it and contacted me, and I was asked to add a note about him. He had engaged in a Earth Liberation Front act of sabotage or whatever it was. I don't know if it was an arson in 2000. And in 2009, his lawyer started parlaying with the government. And in 2011, he agreed to a plea deal. And as part of this, he gave testimony against other activists, including two who were already imprisoned or had completed their sentences. What he said did not affect their sentences. But a number of his former comrades got very angry at him. The government has long been trying to track and network map radical animal and Earth Liberation Front activists. And so they believe, and I'm sure correctly, that his testimony added to the surveillance of them. So with that caveat, Agronoff describes the Eaton scene this way, the scene that I ran into in the early mid-90s. Says this essay is about the scene in Eaton and Dayton, Ohio, where I lived for the last year before I moved to Syracuse. I admit I never wrote this before because I was afraid of them. And that's the worst part, being afraid of people in the hardcore scene. Being afraid of, I hope I never see them again. And if I do, they'll beat the shit out of me, but I don't care because it will prove me correct. At a Snapcase show, this kid in a leather jacket was dancing not any harder than the other straight edge kids, but one of the Ohio kids started to beat the hell out of him. The person in question who did this, JC, claimed the leather jacket guy had kicked him, but JC didn't seem to notice the 20 or so people that had already left because of how violently he and his friends were dancing. I watched him also, JC, pick Brian of Militant Records up off the floor and throw him on the stage. 1995 started out the same, even worse. At the Birthright and Everlast show, my friend John was dancing and he was at the very front. Now, JC from behind him jump kicked him in the back. And then later at an Outcast and Seven show, halfway through the second set, two heavy metal kids started dancing, and one of them was wearing a Potleaf shirt. I regret not warning him, but since no one was dancing, I didn't. Well, his presence was enough. JC jump kicked the Potleaf kid in the face, and almost instantly the whole crowd of straight edge kids swarmed on this poor kid. They dragged him outside and set his shirt on fire. Okay, well, this is better than setting him on fire, right? Better. These kids are jocks, fucking tough guys that got a Youth of Today record and picked and choose what they wanted to believe in. A couple of them think they're hardline. For those who are truly hardline, violence is only in defense. Attacking innocent kids at hardcore shows, or to justify it is not the act of an enlightened person. Now, I just want to say that you can't retroactively declare people like not part of movements because of their actions. Like there's all kinds of people in movements that they identify as part of one and participate in them. That is part of the movement itself. And I think we need to, I appreciate at least that Agronoff was saying these are not our values, but I think it's wrong to say that they're not hardline as part of doing this. Anyway, Eeyore's book was wonderful. I really liked it. If you ran into, after I published this, a lot of people were like, oh my God, those guys. I knew some people mentioned in the book and other people I knew them. And so if you're familiar with the scene and want to know more about it, I highly recommend this book.